A review is a human process. And so we need to understand the people who are part of the process. Now, obviously, when you're going to do a review, you're going to have two key types of folks: the people who are presenting stuff and the people who are reviewing stuff. It's the definition of a review. But we're going to give a better definition to what those consist of. What are the different types of authors? What are the different types of reviewers? And then what are some support personnel that we're going to introduce and recommend here for you doing your reviews? So the author is important to understand who this person is and what they bring to the mix. The author does not necessarily mean it's the person who's the most knowledgeable about the item that's being reviewed. Quite often, the author is somebody who has come in to edit something that somebody else had worked with previously. Or perhaps the author is somebody who is brand new to the company and just handed this to go get reviewed. So you need to understand the role the author is coming into the system. If they are the creator, if they are the expert, then you might want to make sure you have enough deference to respect the work they've done. If they're new, you might want to give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt and help them and coach them in what you're looking for, and not hold them to the same level of accountability of why did you make this decision or that decision. It might not have been a decision they made at all. So it's important when you come in as a reviewer that you have a respect and understanding of where the project lies, who the people are who's working on this, and how you're being asked to contribute to the system. So that speaks to the reviewers. You can't do a review without reviewers. And there's a lot of different places reviewers come from. So as an author, if you're presenting something to be reviewed, you have to understand what that reviewer expectation from their viewpoint is. And as a reviewer, understand why you're being brought in and what you're being asked to play the role as. So the two different types here is the subject matter experts and the team members. Now the subject matter experts are brought in because of some specific expertise. It might be a technical expertise. We're building a website and we have a person who really understands web development frameworks. We're building a database table and we bring in our database modeling experts. Whatever that's going to be going on, a technical aspect. Somebody's brought in to review the technical aspects of the project. Early on in the project, we often are involved with domain experts. If you're building a banking application, well, we need somebody who knows about banks. If you're building an aircraft, we want somebody who knows about building airplanes. They're not necessarily technology experts. I might talk to a pilot about what they want to see in front of them when they're flying an airplane. I might talk to a bank teller about what would make it easier to serve the customers. I might even go to the customers themselves. So we want to have a good rounded aspect of both technology experts and business experts and whomever it is based off of what we're reviewing. The team members we're working with are also going to be included because they're the people we're working with. If I'm a requirements person, my author most likely is going to be a requirements expert. As opposed to if you're doing code, you're going to be the developers of the author. But if I'm reviewing requirements, I'm still probably going to bring my developers in to help them understand what they're going to be building and let them ask questions. If I'm writing code, I might bring the requirements folks in, the analyst in, to make sure I've implemented it the way the requirements was planned to do. And so there's a lot of different roles inside of there. Now, we also have to understand the reviewers need to know their scope. I don't want to bring in a domain expert to a code review if they don't have any ability to understand what's going on. I might have a special session to have them look at some particular thing, but don't bring 30 people to a meeting. It's going to be highly technical when only a handful of them know how the lingo goes and what they'd be looking for. So that's part of the facilitator's role. The facilitator's role is to help to guide the review. They're there to look at whatever process the organization has defined and keep the participants to that process. So some places will require that everything's reviewed beforehand. So at the start of the meeting, the facilitator would ask, has everybody reviewed this? And if they haven't, well, maybe they reschedule the meeting. Or they say, okay, well, let's take 20 minutes for you to review that, and then we'll start the meeting. That's a really common step in organizations who believe, as I tend to, that you need to review things offline ahead of time. In a meeting is the least effective time to review stuff. We'll talk about that later on. But the facilitator is the one who's going to be the one to look at that as a rule and enforce those rules. The facilitator is not an expert. They're not the one who knows the most about the technology or the business. Then they probably shouldn't be. We don't want them taking a critical view of what's being reviewed because that gives the wrong impression, the wrong focus. It gives bias. It makes other people maybe perhaps feel they're not being heard because the person in charge is taking over and making decisions. So we kind of like facilitators who are good at facilitating. They're not the boss of the results, they're the boss of the meeting to some degree. Again, they shouldn't be a dictator over the meeting. Their job is to make sure that the stakeholder of the review being done well is represented. I want the reviews to be efficient, effective, productive. I want to get the right stuff out of it. Often the facilitator has to be the bad guy. And they have to say, hey, is this a really important blocking topic? I know where I work, there's certain team members who do have this tendency to constantly dominate the conversation because their issue is the most important for them and they're going to keep pushing it, but it might not be the most important for that time. We only have an hour and we can't spend 20 minutes on a system that's taking up 2% of the total functionality. But that happens. And then you miss key things, important things. Perhaps you should schedule more time or more likely just take that topic offline because maybe only a few people actually are interested or care about that. But then again, it ties into a lot of the process and the review. And the facilitator is the one who has to understand that. They have to understand, do we need more time? Do we need to schedule more time? Do we need to go offline? How do we come up with the best answers? And it's a tough role. And it's important to have this role because you don't want the author to be the one to have to say people, well, let's not talk about this. Let's not talk about that. You want somebody who doesn't necessarily know to ask the question. Is this something that everybody cares about or is this something we can take offline? And by asking the question, often people will step back and say, you know what, you're right. We need to go work on this later on. Because the point of the review is not to solve everything right there during the meeting. The point of the review is to see what are the things that need to be worked on further. We don't do collaborative design, or at least if you haven't done collaborative design, why are you doing it at the point of the review? Why are you stopping everything and saying, let's just everybody stop the work and everybody contribute now? That's the role of the facilitator, is to try and make sure you're doing that. Now, the scribe, as a final role inside of here, might seem pretty obvious. They take notes. But why are they there? Anybody can take notes, right? Well, yes, they certainly can. But if the author is focused on answering questions, if the author is focused on explaining the understanding of the system, and the reviewers are focused on providing their feedback, and maybe there's many of them that are providing feedback, and the facilitator is there to make sure everybody they're engaged in listening to where the conversation is going and whether it's being productive. It's nice to be able to take off the cognitive load of all those folks and have one person whose fundamental role is just saying, okay, I'm sorry, what was that question so I can capture it? Oh, what was the action there? Or if you finish up a conversation, is there an action that we need to record from there? And then at the end, they can be the one jumping up and down and say, by the way, let's review the notes. I'll send them out. Often the scribe also is the person who you send the comments to ahead of time. If the reviewers are asked to do stuff ahead of time, perhaps the scribe receives them, collates them based off of the subject, and then helps the facilitator focus the review. It doesn't necessarily have to be that involved. It could be less formal than that. But especially in big reviews, it's really nice to have somebody whose role is to do just that. If I'm reviewing some code with 3 people, I don't have to have a scribe. That's fine. But if I'm going to bring in for a big design review, a big requirements review, a big test plan review, I probably want to have somebody who's responsible for making sure we ask those questions. Have we captured all the questions? Is this the right question that we captured? And what are the actions and who are being assigned the actions, and big things like that to make sure the results of the review are being captured and spread out there. So this is one tiny aspect of the whole review process. We're going to continue to review this in additional videos here, but it's important to think about who's going to be there. The roles we put up there, the author, the scribe, the facilitator, the reviewers, there are also many types of them. And so understand within the big process how you're going to use these formal and informal roles, and then what types of people are going to fit into these places. Do I have enough people? Am I willing to spend the time to do that? If you're not willing to spend the time to include a facilitator, then perhaps reviews aren't super important. You can ask the question of, do I really want to do reviews? We shouldn't be doing reviews just to check a box, so consider the people, because the people and their time is the cost of doing the review. And so if it's worth it, make sure you're putting the appropriate people and the appropriate time towards reviews. If not, you're just basically doing it for the sake of doing it, perhaps much more than getting a specific result. So continue on in additional videos, but that's it for this one.